Welcome to Let's Be Well Together podcast.
You're in the right place, the perfect place, if you're looking for a wellness check-in team whose goal is to remind you to think about wellness and encourage you to make wellness a priority. It all stems from my book, Accidentally Well. This is episode 36. A territorial acknowledgement improves allyship with Indigenous people. As part of a reconciliation process, we make our podcast from lands located within the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We acknowledge the presence and traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land. We are treaty people, responsible to honor the original caretakers and to serve as stewards for the land. We're back with an episode of Let's Be Well Together podcast, and I'm with guest co-host Elise Seifert, who happens to be my daughter too.
Yes, hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And today is going to be the first part of what's probably going to be a series because Elise has spent a lot of time traveling. So these are going to be a few lessons on Elise's travels. I don't know what we'll call it, the Elise Travel Series.
I think that sounds wonderful.
And it makes sense to me if we start where you started, and that was teaching English as a second language in Korea. So just tell us a little bit about how you got there and what you were doing when you were there.
Of course. I was always really interested in traveling. I got a travel bug pretty early. So after I had finished university, I thought about pursuing a job in which I could travel. So I had visited a job fair at my university, and I had learned about teaching English abroad, and I knew I was interested in teaching, and this would be a great way to kind of dip my toes in the water and see if this was the career path for me. So I had found out about teaching English in South Korea, and South Korea had a lot of perks in terms of what they would offer you. So they paid for your accommodations, your flight. So it seemed just like a great deal for me. And it's a part of the world that I had always wanted to see, but I had never really imagined myself in South Korea. Maybe I thought China or Japan. So going to South Korea was pretty special. It was unique.
And so are you saying then that there were options to teach English as a second language in other countries?
Yes.
And when you say perks, it looked like South Korea had stuff to offer that some of the other countries weren't offering.
Yes, exactly. So there are a lot of opportunities I find in Asia in particular. There are also some opportunities in Europe and the Middle East that are seeking English teachers, specifically from North America due to our accent. But I found that South Korea would offer the most perks. So some places will not pay for your flight to get there. Some places would not pay for your accommodation, but there they would. So it seemed like a great place to go for me to test this out.
So let me ask about the accent. So are you saying, for example, they preferred a North American accent in some of these places compared to what, Australian or British or something of that nature?
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
And different companies would actually hire different kinds of accents. So I know while I was in South Korea, I met other people who were working at different academies, and they would only hire British people because they wanted their students to learn from a British speaking.
Interesting. So there's schools out there selecting their accents.
Yes.
And you happen to see a bunch that wanted North American accents.
Yes.
Okay, so have we talked then about how you got to go to Korea, and now can we turn to what you did once you got there?
Yes, I think that sounds great.
Okay, let's do that.
Mm-hmm. So once I got there, I had arrived. I was picked up by someone who worked for my school, and they took me to a hotel that I was staying at, and I met my boss, and I had shadowed another teacher for a while. And while I was there, I learned that I would be working at what's called a hagwon. So a hagwon would best be translated to be an academy. And it's after school. It's school after school. My hagwon was specifically just teaching English.
And where was it?
It was in a city called Changwon. It's close to the south of South Korea, close to Busan, which is the second largest city, and that's kind of the beach city.
Yeah, and Sheila went to visit at one point and said that the city looks spectacular. Changwon?
Amazing.
Right.
It's a very wealthy city, actually. So it's one of the wealthiest per capita in Korea. So there were a lot of very wealthy people, and the buildings are just beautiful. Everything is very bright at night, just full of lights. And the way it works in Korea is everything is built up because they don't have as much space. So instead of building large buildings, like imagine a box store of a Walmart, it would be built on top of each other. So each level is kind of a different department. So my school was actually on the third and fourth floor of a building, and it was in the city center of Changwon.
And what age group were you teaching?
I taught ages 7 to 13. We had them divided between elementary and middle school. And some of the students came 3 days a week, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and others came 2 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday. So the elementary students would come first, and they would come between 4:15 and 6:45. So after they've been at school all day, they would come to us, and we would just focus on English. And after that, typically, they would go to a different Hagwon where they would focus on science, Korean, math. So their days were filled with different learning. And after that, sometimes they even went to what was called Private Study Academy, where they learned to manage their homework. So they would go there, they learned how to prioritize their homework, and they would complete it there. And then the next day they would do it all again.
And that's, in terms of this being a What's on Your Mind interview, that's what's on my mind, because I know a couple times you came back and expressed some concern. You know, we're a show about balance and a whole bunch of categories of wellness in our lives. And obviously, we're not going to judge or say what they should be doing in Korea, because they obviously have their own reasons for doing things. We're not in their position. We're not in a place to judge. But it raises concerns for me when I hear about kids spending all day in multiple levels of school, from basically when they wake up to when they fall asleep, in the sense of me thinking, well, forget being over in Korea for a minute. Let's come back to Canada.
Yes.
And what I wanted to ask, you know, because you've had the insights of, you're a teacher now right now you're teaching kindergarten, you've taught other ages, but having seen both, you know, what do you think in terms of balance for our kids in Canada as part of the school day, but also just living their lives and just being kids and just being able to play?
Yeah, I think it's so important for kids to be kids and have time to explore and learn and grow. And I think kids learn from play. I think that when they are playing, you see them consolidating their learning, whether that's something social, something they see at home. They might play it out while they're using different playing toy or tools or materials. And they also take what they're learning, like their math learning, their literacy learning, and they will just play with it. And that's how they learn. That's truly what I believe. And I also thought a lot about my experiences in Korea, and I thought about how they're learning how to take tests. So when I was teaching them, they would be learning how to take an English fluency test so that they would be able to go and pursue university in a North American country. And we just taught them, this is the format of the test. Listen for the key points. That's what you want to retell. And we taught them how to do that. And I was wondering, am I really teaching them how to be fluent English speakers? Or am I just teaching them how to be good test takers? So that was something I took from that experience, and I want to apply to my students' learning. Is I don't want them to just be good at taking tests. I want them to be able to take these skills and apply them to their lives, or take these skills and be able to apply it to their learning. And so I think that was the biggest learning that I had from that experience, is that I think it's better for our students not to learn how to take a test.
I've been watching, I know you know this, that I've been watching a bunch of nature shows.
Yeah.
And it's not a great analogy. Analogies often aren't, but there's a whole bunch of shows. So I watch a whole bunch of shows about lion cubs and cheetah cubs and all kinds of young animals. And the story's repeated over and over, which is when they're little, they play fight all the time and they chase each other. And what that's all about, according to the people I'm watching, is they're learning life lessons that they need to hunt or to run away or to escape and all kinds of stuff. And they do that by play.
Definitely.
And even sometimes the parents play with them. So if there's no siblings, I saw one recently where a mother bear, it looked weird because she was like bonking her baby bear a bit, but she was just letting the baby bear learn how to fight and stuff. So what are some examples then? So if you have learned that from your perspective, it's good for kids to play, it's good for kids to get creative and brainstorm, what are some ways you do that?
Yeah, so our curriculum actually teaches a play-based learning approach in kindergarten. So I've been exploring that a lot this year, as kindergarten is a new role for me. And something recently that we've done that I thought went really well was exploring maps. My students had a puzzle of Canada and they got really interested in it. And they started asking me about the geography of Canada. So then we started learning about the world itself and its place in our solar system. And then we started to think about the geographical elements of our Earth, and we brainstormed together what they were, and I made a little map. So we talked about there's mountains, and they said inside the mountains there can be caves, and there's a river that can go from the lake, and they're really consolidating the things that they already know and helping me to create a map. And then the students then broke into smaller groups. They created their own maps and they shared it with the class, and it was an opportunity for them to learn from each other and to show things that they know that maybe they can teach each other. And then during our free playtime, some of the other students decided, I want to make another map, and this time it'll be a treasure map. And
they could do anything they wanted, and that's what they wanted to do?
And that's what they chose. And
that's awesome.
They're just so keen to learn. I think they're going to pick it up. And I think it just promotes more creativity, because that was another wonder I had while I was teaching in South Korea. Everything was so structured that when it came a time for them to write an essay, we did a lot of writing with the students. And when they had to write an essay, they had to write maybe about their favorite sport. And they were like, I don't know what my favorite sport is. I'm just used to filling in blanks in my book. So I think promoting creativity is key. And that's how things change, I think, when we let kids learn and create. And I think that's how they grow.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time.
Yep.
But it's interesting that it's a great example of travel and experiencing other cultures helps you have an insight. So when you're back home and you're working in your career as a teacher, you get some ideas that you hope help the kids that you're teaching.
I hope so, yeah.
Guests are giving their time, expanding our minds.
Today's interview is in the categories of mental and physical wellness. We welcome back Imran Kamal. Last time he told us how he recognized his alcohol addiction, and today we talk about how he's working to treat it. Imran is a lawyer working for the province of Ontario and specializing in Indigenous rights. He started his career in 2013 practicing in the family law area with a focus on custody and access. He transitioned to the Catholic Children's Aid Society of Hamilton, where he worked until last year. He's a certified specialist in Indigenous legal issues and the only child protection lawyer in Ontario with that designation. In 2021, Imran was named one of the top 25 most influential lawyers in Canada, which is quite prestigious, and he was named that by the Canadian Lawyer magazine. His passion is to work frontline and grassroots. In 2017, he established Hamilton Lawyers Feed the Hungry, which gathers volunteers from the legal community to financially support and prepare and serve meals for 80 to 100 children and youth. Since 2016, Imran has also been a weekly volunteer at a men's live-in addiction treatment center, providing support and resources for men overcoming alcohol and drug addiction. Additionally, he's a board member of Mission Services of Hamilton and the AIDS Network. So, Imran, last time you were quite forthcoming in telling your personal story about how you recognized that you had an issue with addiction. Today, I'm hoping to chat with you about, coping mechanisms and the things that you've done to try and move forward. And I understand it's probably a lifelong exercise. So let's just start with where we ended off last time. You said that you had a meaningful chat with a friend who convinced you or helped you see that it was time to do something about it.
Yeah, so, I'll start and preface it by saying that a lot of my journey is through the 12 steps. I'm not here to promote the 12 steps, nor do I believe it is the only way to go through recovery from addiction. It is what worked for me. I'm not here promoting it and certainly not saying that it's the only thing. So I really did want to preface that. The other thing I'll say is that it's not a linear, straightforward journey that many people think it is. So I went to my first 12-step meeting in the summer of 2015. My clean and sober date is January 5th, 2016. And so there is a time period between when I went to my first meeting and when I have practiced complete abstinence ever since.
Is that considered kind of a special day?
Yes, very much for me. And so for me, I first, when I started, in the summer of 2015, deciding that I needed to change my life, it was very much from the perspective of I wanted to stop one substance, or I wanted to minimize, or I only wanted to, party on weekends. It came with these parameters or these conditions on my terms, but I wasn't ready to fully commit or surrender to changing my life. It was just, to make slight improvements, or really to manipulate myself to try to figure it out. And through that period of time, when I was trying to figure it out, what I realized is that I continued to be in a lot of pain, and I continued to be unwell. And, if I can put it candidly, I continued to hate myself and want to die. And that was the real struggle, right? And everything else was just a coping mechanism with me hating myself. And so
I don't want to just gloss over that. Did you feel at the time, so I've known people who've gone through those kinds of periods, and they experienced some pretty serious depression. And when they felt very depressed, some of the things they said, for example, is they just didn't even want to get out of bed. They didn't want to do anything. They were extremely tired all the time. Is that the kind of feeling that you were going through, depression, or was it some different thing?
It was very much that, but with a dependency, with a substance dependency, right? So it was like, I don't want to get out of bed unless I'm going to go use or drink. I don't want to do anything unless it involves partying, using, drinking, all of that sort of stuff. I didn't want to hang out with people unless they were people who supported me partying and using and drinking. And obviously, family and close friends were not, or good friends were not included in that category, right? So there was a lot of pushing people away, a lot of lying, a lot of hiding, a lot of making excuses at that time in my life.
Maybe this is a leading question, but you don't want to do anything. You've got a lot of feelings of kind of self-hatred, and you don't want to get out unless it's to party. When you did get out and then you did party, would you then feel this tremendous guilt and it replays itself?
Yeah, it's very much a cycle where, I often jokingly say, like, I didn't stop drinking and partying because I hated it. In fact, I stopped it because I loved it so much. I hated what happened after, right? I hated waking up in the morning and having, completely forgotten or ignored my responsibilities, forgotten and ignored my commitments, and hurt the people that I loved as a result of all of that. That's what it was. And so it's like, yeah, the cycle of guilt continues. And then the only way to overcome guilt is to continue hiding from the world by using and drinking. And then you do it all over again. So
how are you coping now? How are you getting past it? And how are you not falling back into that routine?
So, like I said earlier, I'm a member of a 12-step fellowship, and I very much continue to practice my recovery through the 12 steps, but it is a lot broader than that. Like you read in my bio, I volunteer weekly at a men's rehab center, and that in many ways helps me stay grounded. It reminds me where I came from and where I can go if I stop practicing my recovery. And, over the years, I have sponsored and mentored hundreds of men and youth recovering from addiction and trying to get clean and sober. And that keeps me grounded, because I truly believe that it's in the giving that I receive, that it's through sharing my experience I'm able to keep my own recovery going. I truly believe in a all-around wellness, right? And so on the last episode, I talked about or touched on my need to improve on spiritual wellness, which had been a robust part of my recovery that had dwindled a bit. In other areas, I need to make sure that I'm eating well, that I'm exercising, that I'm mentally disconnecting from stressful situations when I need to, that I'm keeping myself engaged socially appropriately and disconnecting appropriately when needed. And so I do believe in an overall wellness in order to keep my recovery in terms of my addiction at bay.
That's a great thought. And I've heard that in many different contexts, but the overall concept is that you're building resiliency, that in different areas of your life, I call them categories of wellness, but I don't want to get stuck on terminology, but in different areas of your life that focus on physical health, mental health, and the rest of it, spirituality, by strengthening that, you're building resilience. And when you mention it the way you are, I can see how that resilience would also help in a context where you're trying to stay on recovery. And I've also heard other people say that, for example, I was having a discussion with somebody about the homeless situation in Kitchener, and it's quite challenging. And people, especially combining homelessness and addictions of one sort or another, and then how do we provide them with opportunities to break the cycle? And that person told me, for most of us, me, the Johns of the world, you think too linear. You think that there's going to be a point where someone gets on the track to the perfect life, and once they're on it, they stay on it. But it's not like that. There's a step forward and a step back, and then 3 forward and 2 back, and it's a process. So I can imagine that sometimes with people you sponsor or help, there's a back step. And how do you what do you say to someone in that situation to try and help them say, look, it's not over. You've had a step back, but you can step forward again.
I mean, I believe it's not over until I'm 6 feet under, and so as long as we're breathing, we have a fighting chance. And there's always going to be setbacks, whether we're talking specific to addiction or whether we're talking just in life general, right? And so it's often that game of whack-a-mole where like you just do the best you can to put out the situation at hand and move forward. And when you look at it sort of over time, we often look back and we're like, wow, I've made it a lot further than I realized, right? Sometimes it feels like we're on a spiral staircase and we're just going in circles until you take a moment to look down and you're like, wow, I've actually also been moving upwards in addition to moving in circles. And that's very much how I look at it. While it seems like we might be taking a step back, it's not a complete step back. And over time, it's still a step in the right direction.
And now we have touched on this, so I'm not sure if we've already covered the turf, but I am wondering here you are putting yourself out there on some pretty personal issues, in a context where you're in a career where reputation really matters. And some people might be afraid of the effect of putting themselves out there on their career. What are you hoping to achieve by sharing your story and telling people about what you went through and how you've been able to move past it?
My biggest hope is to lessen the stigma around addiction and mental health overall. I think that, there's a lot of strong advocates working in the mental health space right now, and addiction sort of, it feels like, at least from my perspective, gets left in the corner. And so my hope is to help people understand, and that's why I started with a little joke with the last episode, right? That addicts and addiction are not just about homeless people living under a park bench, and that an addict and the disease of addiction can be in anybody, and therefore recovery is available to anybody.
I would guess that kind of the majority of people who have addictions are living next door, are friends and family that, people that and so that makes a lot of sense. Just before I turn to our last question, the one you're familiar with now, a couple things. I don't want to shut you down if there's something more you wanted to chat about in terms of trying to confront addiction and trying to get past it or to live with it. And secondly, is it something that you feel like you're done now, like you're good? Or is it something that you have to address continually?
From my experience, recovery is an ongoing, lifelong process if I want to be my best self. But that doesn't mean it always has to look the same, right? Like when I first got clean and sober, I went to a lot more meetings than I go to now. But there are certain parts of my wellness plan, call it, or my recovery that are consistent. And, like I talked about earlier, I need to look at all areas of my wellness. So one of the things in my practice is that I do make sure that I keep in regular contact with my friends who are also in recovery, right? And so it's not like we sit there and we talk about how do I not get drunk today every day? But we talk about our life, and when there's stressors or celebrations, we share those with each other just to get out of ourselves and as part of staying well. And so I surround myself with like-minded people who are also recovering from addiction. And then all the other areas of wellness, right? Spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, all of those areas, ensuring that I'm doing the best I can in all areas. Sometimes I fall short, but it's very much an ongoing journey. I will never, or try not to, use the term recovered, but use the terminology that I am recovering from addiction.
Well, that's amazing. So you know from the last time that we ask every guest the same couple questions. So in the context where we all have areas of wellness that are important to us, but not enough time to focus on all of them at any given time, we ask, it's essentially a mini wellness check-in. Are you currently neglecting an area of wellness in your life? And if so, can you think of one activity you can do to foster wellness in that area?
Yes, and I hate to admit this, it's my physical wellness at this point in time. I was one of those people in the beginning of the pandemic. I used it as an opportunity to really focus in on my physical wellness, particularly since I didn't have to drive to the office anymore. I used that commute time in the morning to go for a jog in the morning, home cooked meals, all of that. And I seem to have gotten complacent in that, and find every excuse not to wake up at 6 a.m. and go for a jog anymore. And so I've been feeling the effects of lacking in my physical wellness that I need to get remotivated on.
I don't know how old you are. I'm just looking at you, and I see when you got called to the bar, and the red flag that I wave, I've mentioned before, is you're kind of at that space in your life, that time in your life where I was when I kind of let it all slip. And it goes south pretty fast, and it's really hard to recover it. So I truly hope that you find a way to get back into it, and that you can continue to keep that a part of your everyday life, and that you'll keep it as one of those elements of resilience that keep you healthy and strong and more capable of being well in the other areas. So good luck with that. So thanks very much. You've given a lot of your time and your person to us, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm Cameron, and welcome to another installment of the Adventures of the Starving Artist. So it's midweek, it's Wednesday, happy hump day, we're halfway to the weekend. Yesterday happened to be my birthday, which is pretty sweet. Number 29. It only happens once, so I tried to make the most of it. As far as birthdays go, it wasn't anything super crazy. I had a great little lunch with my mum, and then taught lessons all day long, a day full of music. I had one cancellation, and so I kind of shuffled some students around, and managed to finish my day a little bit earlier than usual, which happened to work out in a really cool way. Right before my last lesson of the day, my buddy Andy sent me a text and asked if I wanted to do the open mic at Live on Elgin. Now, normally, like I said, I teach too late to be able to attend that. But the way it worked out. So I asked him to put my name on the list for signups, because I would be a little bit late for that, and made my way there as soon as I could. I arrived just after the first act had started, so a little bit late, but I did manage to catch half of his first song and the entire second one, so that was great. And he was doing a very cool Andy McKee style guitar and voice thing where it's very percussive. The guitar is also played like a drum simultaneously. Very cool. We caught a few more acts, and then I did a couple songs, and then Andy did a couple songs. But the story I wanted to tell you was from the very last performance of the night. There's an older gentleman who I gather is a bit of a staple at this open mic and others around the city here, named Warren. And Warren likes to do a reading of poetry set to music that's provided on an improvised basis by some of the other musicians who performed earlier in the night. With me so far? So towards the end of the evening, Warren comes up and taps me on the shoulder and asks, "Hey, would you like to sing some improv over some of these poems?" Well, I'll give it a shot. And he asks Andy if he'd like to play guitar over some of the poems. So Andy says he'll give it a shot. And then he asks this other guy that we were sitting with, whose stage performance name he's going under Slim Shady. Now, some of you might recognize that name. Slim Shady is Eminem's persona, one of them. And this particular performer really leans into it and does a killer job. Great Eminem covers. Earlier in the night, he had done Till I Collapse, playing the piano and rapping it. It was pretty awesome. So the three of us get up there, and Warren starts reading the poems, and we start improvising. So he had given me a little, like a Spark Notes or a Coles Notes, depending on your age, thing of the key lines he wanted me to highlight vocally. But the rest, he said, if something moves you, jump on it. Otherwise, add some tunes. So Andy and Slim start playing instruments. I start oohing and humming and hitting the key lines. And I found myself really being pulled back to some moments in school where I took not only songwriting and music courses, but also a poetry course. My professor's name was Pat Pattison. Yes, you heard that correctly. Pat Pattison. Very, very cool guy. He knows his stuff. And one of the things that he taught was the concept of prosody. In a nutshell, what that means is, in poetry, when a word, it's almost like onomatopoeia. But instead of something like beep or crash, it's, say the word is stop, and you make the line stop. That's prosody. Or if, the poetry line is something about the water rushing over a rock, you make sure to rush through the word rush, right? Prosody. And so, as Warren was reading the poems, there were lots of opportunities where certain words would sort of light up for me. And it's like, oh, that's a good prosodic moment. And I would try and mimic it somehow with the voice. So he was doing a line, there was something about the toll that war takes. And I made war sound very harsh and ugly. And then the next line was about peace, and I tried to make it sound warm and round and peaceful. And at the end, we got a really big round of applause. So I guess we did all right. That's all I got for you. It was a really cool experience, and I look forward to trying it again sometime. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Cameron. This is The Starving Artist. Until next time.
We love our listeners, and it's great that you could join us. We could use your help. How? Listen to our episodes. Subscribe to us and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on Instagram at lets.be.well.together. And make sure you tell your friends about us.
Move that body like we're meant to do.
It's accidentally well, but in a different spin. It's not a book.
Oh, yeah,
it's
it is accidentally well. You're right. Creative.
We were just talking about how we just kind of happen to come across things by coincidence that make for some good and also healthy food.
Yeah, really, really good. And it was interesting because these bananas that we're going to talk about, it took a long time to try them.
Yeah, I thought it was a dumb idea.
Mm-hmm. And then you tried them. You're like, hey, these are really good.
So where did you get that idea?
Well, actually, it was from Cheryl. She sent us something, right?
So one of our listeners, Cheryl, gave us an idea for a shake of some sort.
Yeah, like more like kind of ice cream, but not ice cream, like frozen fruit. But the problem is that when I froze the bananas, I couldn't get them to blend. Like we don't have like a silver bullet or something, right? So you can zzz.
We just have a cheap blender that doesn't do a great job.
So I couldn't blend the bananas. So I decided that I just would eat them because like I don't want to waste them.
Okay, but just to clarify, so what happened was you cut up a bunch of bananas and put them in the freezer.
Yeah, so I took not really ripe bananas because often you take old bananas and you put them in the freezer and you bake with them. But these bananas were
just regular good bananas.
Yeah. And I would peel them and I cut them in threes. And then I just kind of put them in the freezer in a container and they froze. I tried to blend them, but I couldn't. So I decided I was going to eat them. And it was really cool because they're kind of like a popsicle, but then they melt. It just takes a while to eat them, which is great.
It's flavorful, takes time to eat. It's really nice for late at night.
Yeah, and it really does taste like a dessert.
And you know what surprised me too? Because thinking that you were going to use it right away, you didn't even put a lid on the container.
No.
And I was thinking, well, that's ridiculous. They're going to go brown, but
they didn't.
No. So, right now we have these yellow bananas in the freezer.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, feel like a little snack. It's a nice, you're eating a third of a banana. Even if you have two, it's like 2/3 of a banana.
Yeah, it's so great.
And it takes a while to eat and it hits the spot.
Yeah. So great idea for a little snacky thing and other things. So John has been making bread. I don't know if he's talked about this very much.
I'm sure we've mentioned it. I like to make sourdough bread.
He is so good at it. So the problem is that you need to make it in order to feed the starter. You got to make bread every, how often?
Well, I think it was more, I can like pick and choose how much I make.
Oh, okay.
But I just got into this rhythm where I was making pretty much 5 or 6 loaves a week.
Yeah.
Because I just would, it's my rhythm. I would get up and I would do this and then later I would cook it. But we weren't eating it enough.
Yeah.
And And not only that, it only stays good. So there's no preservatives. It's very basic. It's delicious. It's super soft when you first cut into it. But, it's good the next day, and it maybe is good kind of a day and a half. But by the second day, it just doesn't have that same flavor or same texture.
Right. So you do a lot of Caesar salad, because that's the kind of salad that our son likes, Caesar salad. So John was like, hey, why don't I make croutons with the stale? You
ran out of croutons one time. And then I remember seeing something about focaccia bread or something. And for whatever reason, it hit my head. Well, the sourdough bread, there's like little spaces of air in it. Mm-hmm. It kind of looks like the same as croutons that have those little spaces. So I thought, why don't I try making them at home? Like, what's the worst can happen? It doesn't work out.
And it's amazing.
So I took off the crust and got rid of it, cut it into little cubes. Mm-hmm. Here's what I do if anyone wants to try it. I heat the oven to 375. I spread out the little cubes on some trays, top and bottom, put it in for 8 minutes, take it out, flip them, put them in for 8 minutes, take them out, and then I'll put it in maybe 2 or 3 minutes at a time till it looks like it's the right texture. Mm-hmm. Works perfect.
Perfect. Amazing.
Was doing that for like 2 months.
Yep.
And then one time...
This did really bother me, actually, because I love crust. So the fact that you would cut off the crust and throw it away, put it in the compost.
Even though it was stale?
Even though it was stale. It really broke my heart, because I love it that much.
So 2 months, that happens for like a couple of months. Then one time I had a whole loaf of bread, and for whatever reason, we didn't get to it. And by the way, I don't make that much anymore, so we don't really waste much.
Right.
But I had a whole loaf of bread, and I was cutting it, and I was just like cutting these long swaths of the crust off the top. And I looked down and I realized, you know what? They almost look like you can make crackers out of these. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did.
So he was like, hey, Sheila, you want me to try this?
I'm like, why don't I try it? And so I kind of cooked them not quite as long. I think in this case, I put them in 5 minutes aside. Uh-huh. And it makes amazing crackers.
And did you add anything to those?
Nothing. Oh, yeah. Sorry. To the croutons, I sprinkle on a little bit of garlic powder and onion powder.
Okay. And what about the crackers?
Nothing.
They are so amazing.
But don't forget, they will have the seeds, like we have sesame seeds and poppy seeds. So some of them will have seeds on them.
And they kind of, because they have that little curve, it's like almost dippable, So I had it with hummus. Oh my God, it's to die for. So from now on, you've got to make it bread just for that.
That's what croutons. I'm doing now. I make a loaf knowing that it's just going to be croutons and crackers. So there you go. So I guess all we're trying to say is it pays to experiment and have some fun with food and make sure it's healthy.
Mm-hmm, very healthy. I think
all these ones we did are healthy and safe. We're not taking a chance with food that's going to poison us.
Nope.
And have some fun with it. And every once in a while, you'll end up with something you like.
There's a thought. Popped up while running.
It's October 2nd, and the show's being released on October 4. So the natural topic for today's running pop-up has to be my experience with the London Marathon, which I just ran today. I finished about 5 hours ago. All I can say was an amazing and memorable experience. I think for anyone who has the calling to run a marathon, I would definitely put it on my bucket list. And of course, you need to either be lucky like me and get through the lottery, or you have to qualify, or you have to do enough fundraising to get you in. There were so many great things about today's run that I can't even cover it all, so I'll just hit some of the highlights. Now, on my performance side, that's not really the key here. It's pretty much what I expected. I finished in the time that I expected, and I anticipated that it would be feeling pretty good for about 2/3 of the time, and then really hard for 1/3 of the time, and that's what happened. And believe me, some of those really hard times are really hard. All I can say is I'm glad I got through them. My feet are a bit sore, my legs are a bit sore, but it's all great. But rather than the performance, I'd rather focus on a few things that happened during the race. One thing that surprised me was I actually felt a bit emotional at times. I hate to say it, misty-eyed. Initially, it happened when I was walking with thousands and thousands of people to get to the starting area, and I just got this great feeling from everyone around me. I just felt kind of swept up in the moment. It was a really nice moment. And then I'd never seen crowds like this before. I can't even imagine them. The streets were lined for a lot of the time with thousands of people, and they were all cheering and saying really nice things, and there were kids high-fiving us, and a lot of them had cardboard targets, and it said, "Punch this for energy," and I had my name written on my shirt, and so did many others, and you'd hear, you can do it, John, go, and just all these words of encouragement. And everything was just so real and meaningful. It was just amazing. And so I couldn't help having another kind of moment where I just felt at one with the crowd and really felt their support and thought it was one of the special things I've ever experienced. Sheila's with me on this vacation, but for a lot of reasons we decided it probably didn't make sense for her to try and actually see me on the course because of the crowds and because a whole bunch of reasons, and not to get into them, and because of some tips we got from a friend. But sure enough, I was really tired late in the race, and I had about 7 kilometers to go, and I was really trying to buckle down, but my brain was telling me to stop, so I had to force my legs to keep going. And all of a sudden I looked up, and there was Sheila smiling and waving at me and saying hi, and it was unbelievable. It just gave me this boost of energy. I went over and talked to her, obviously, and for the next 2 kilometers I just felt totally energized. So that was an amazing part of it. All in all, it was a day that I'll never forget. And every time I run a marathon, and fortunately I've done 5 now and I've been able to complete them all, I always take some time to think about how lucky I am that I have the health to train and prepare for it and to actually do it, that my legs carry me through it and my lungs. And that's something that's special because so many people would love that opportunity, but for whatever reason they just don't have that opportunity because life throws curveballs at them. And so in the end, it was an amazing experience, one that I'll cherish and one that I'm grateful to have an opportunity to have done. It's me. Am I?
Yeah. Just let me say, flip side of the coin. And today we are going to talk about The Highway of Tears. So this is a book that I read on Audible a few months ago, and I thought we could talk about it. And the book is written by Jessica McDermott, and it's called The Highway of Tears.
I just want to warn people that it's kind of a serious topic.
Serious.
And so you might find it heavy. So I just want to let you know that in advance. So what is the Highway of Tears? The Highway of Tears is a 725 kilometer or 450 mile stretch of Highway 16, which is between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia.
Right. So it's quite far north.
I'll let Sheila tell a little bit more about it. But essentially, one of the issues is there are a lot of places along the highway, including where Indigenous people live and others,
right. Mm-hmm.
and who don't have cars, and there's no kind of bus service.
Right.
So for the most part, a lot of people have to hitchhike to get from one place to another.
And this is well known that people do hitchhike to get from one place to the other.
And sadly, that puts serial killers and bad people in that area. And many women have died on the Highway of Tears.
Yes. And so the thing that bothered me was that I didn't know anything about this. And it has been happening since 1970.
And was this written by someone in the Indigenous community?
No.
Okay.
No, she's not Indigenous, but she did go into the communities, and she actually talked to almost as many as she could, families of the women that died. And she kind of humanized them, these women, in the book, and talked about their family and their life. And so it made it very real.
But I remember after you read it, you were frustrated. Because you were getting, you were reading about the impressions. So people lost their kids, they lost their daughters, they lost their sisters, they lost their mothers, mostly from the perspective of the Indigenous community.
Yes.
And what was the impression of these people, and what was the context? What were the issues and the problems?
A lot of women died on this highway, starting in 1970s approximately.
And when you say die, you mean they were killed?
They were killed, murdered, raped.
Right.
There were quite a few issues, but the 4 main ones, one, it was a very long highway, very vast space in the north. So it was hard to research and find missing people. The people, especially the Indigenous, there was no transportation between towns. There was no buses and no trains. So the only way to go from town to town was hitchhiking, because they couldn't afford to buy cars and they couldn't afford to taxi.
Sometimes what we're talking about here is you could be going to a doctor's appointment, or you could be going to apply for a job.
Yes.
No, and of course, though, sorry, I interrupted you, but then some people, we'll get to it too, like some people were prostitutes. Some people
Yes.
Or going to buy alcohol, which was unfairly used against them. But anyway, I interrupted. So
that's okay. There were no stops between towns, or very few stops. You know how on our highways we have gas stations every 50 kilometers or so? There was rarely a gas station in sight. So there was no safety for people who were on the highway and needed to find safety. And my fourth one was the fact that a lot of the Indigenous women were using drugs, were alcoholics, were sex workers, were poor, or runaways. So they weren't taken seriously because of those issues, which is really sad.
one of the things that's frustrating to me, and you already mentioned, is, and Sammy and I earlier talked about the residential schools. We never learned about it in grade school or high school, or she learned about it in university. I didn't even learn about it in university.
No.
And I never heard about this either for a long time. It's as if it didn't get much press.
Yeah, and it didn't get a lot of press, which was the other problem. A few white women were missing, and they got a lot of press. Of course, this is out west, so maybe we didn't get to see the press, but they did get a lot of support, and there was a lot of searches done, but not for the Indigenous women, which was just very sad.
Or at least what you're saying is that it tended to be when a white woman went missing, it seemed the impression of the Indigenous community was that there was way more resources deployed.
Right.
Way more interest in trying to find out what happened.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, they even caught people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that happened with some of the Indigenous people, but not nearly to the extent.
Right. Right. And it could be that the white people had more money, like the actual families of the missing women. They had money and resources to get groups together and do search parties and that kind of stuff. But
was that in the book?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there was one woman in particular who I think she was going up to work in some kind of camp or something, and the whole camp shut down, and every single worker in the camp came and tried to look for her, and it was sad. But like I said, they talked about all the women and their families and their struggles, and it really brought more to the surface than I ever learned. And I wish that there was a course in high school. There was something that we could have learned about this, because this is part of Canadian history. And it just really saddens me that I didn't know anything about this.
We've had some discussions recently with at least one Indigenous guest, Clarence Kakaji. And he had a really neat kind of approach, and he talked a lot about allyship. I think what he said in part was, he's not sure if we're ready for reconciliation yet.
Right.
That might take more time, but at the very least, we can try and be better allies, both sides,
right.
And we have to start speaking the truths.
Right.
This is one of those issues, and this one's both as against Indigenous people, but also against people who aren't as fortunate in our world.
Right.
You know, who have maybe drug dependencies, or they work as sex workers. Mm-hmm. That does not make you a lesser person.
No.
And yet we see time and again that when it comes to reacting to what happens to people like that, they're treated like lesser people.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. So my goal was just to get the word out there, to get people to know about this book, to read about this book, and hopefully if we can get more information and more knowledge, maybe we can get some things done.
I'm glad you did, because I had no idea about any of this. So I've now started to look into it. I've got to confess, I don't know much about it yet. I've done some basic searches and basic reading, but it's a really important topic. And so I think this is another one of these pieces of the puzzle that fits into the telling of the truths. Until we tell the truths, we can't address anything. Mm-hmm. And that's the first step that would be a good side to allyship, learning about what's happening. Mm-hmm. Someday we might be able to move it more toward reconciliation. So my problem I had when I heard about it was frustrating. Mm-hmm. But I can tell too, like even just hearing the major issues, this is not an easy solution.
Not an easy solution. No,
it's going to take a lot of brainstorming. It's going to take a lot of resources. Mm-hmm. It's going to take a lot
healing.
Of corporate cooperation. Mm-hmm. What I do know though is if people don't even know about it, nothing will
get done. Yeah.
So let's find out about it, and then we can try and get to the next step.
Perfect.
Please remember that we're not providing advice. We hope to inspire you to work towards balance, and we urge you to consult with qualified people if you need advice. The people on the show are speaking in their personal capacities. Their views expressed are their own and don't represent the views or opinions of their outside contacts, their employers, or anyone else. We try to get things right, but we can't guarantee everything we say is correct or that the things we talk about will work for you. Let's be well together, and let's be sure to do that in a safe way.
So it is sign-off time, and we are here in London, England, John and Sheila.
Hey.
And John just finished his marathon.
Yeah, and I did say something about that on Running Pop-Up.
Yes, but you didn't mention the weather. We had amazing weather today, which was very unpredictable.
Yeah, because a lot of people who run marathons, you're glued to watching the weather beforehand. You know, what do you have to wear? Long sleeves, short sleeves, gloves. It was calling for ridiculous amounts of rain for 2 hours during the marathon and steady rain the rest of the time. And I was like flummoxed as to what I should bring because it's complicated. But in the end, we had beautiful weather, not a single drop of rain, cool temperature that a Canadian runner likes.
Yes.
Hardly any wind. It got a little hot at the end, but overall, I was just like, wow, that was amazing.
It was amazing. And I mean, we did get some rain on our bike tour, so that was truly English. It's just not fun being out in the rain. Your hands get cold, so I'm really glad you didn't get stuck in the rain. But the other thing that's interesting about our 10 days here is that we haven't had internet, really. No TV. We've had to only have internet here. And
yeah,
so
we're at an Airbnb, and the person who's running it's having issue with internet. Now, he did do something for us, so we have sort of internet, but not good enough to use TV shows and stuff.
And also 3 days in, so John was late getting the podcast loaded last week.
Yeah, that was a nightmare. So I had to get the podcast loaded on Monday night for Tuesday. There's a time difference, and we had tickets to do things that we couldn't change starting at something like 9 o'clock the next morning. Mm-hmm. So first I tried using a hotspot, and I thought it almost got loaded after like an hour and 15 minutes, and then it died. So that didn't work. So then I was like literally walking the streets close to us looking for places like McDonald's or restaurants open late that had free Wi-Fi.
Because at this point it's 11:30 at night.
I tried a McDonald's. It didn't work. The next morning I get up at like 7 and I go to a coffee shop and they had Wi-Fi. And again, it loaded like 80 or 90% and then died. So it didn't work. And I went home and Sheila's like, well, what are we going to do? Like, I'm sure it's going to stress you out. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to let it stress me out. Let's go enjoy our tours. We did that. My work has an office very close. And I went in there. They had great Wi-Fi. It was uploaded in 5 minutes, but late. So that was a crazy experience.
So if anyone was waiting for the website, for our podcast last week, we're sorry that we were late.
Yes, but it was a pain.
But we got it up and running. But the one thing that I have had here in England is a shanty.
Yeah.
And it's like half lemonade, half lager. And we were with Rose, and she told us, oh, you should try this. It's really delicious. And it is. I'm not a beer drinker, so it's been really hard for me to drink a pint of lager or ale. So this just gives it a nice sweetness, and it was really good. So I might have a new drink.
Cool. Anything else?
Nope. We're going to maybe see a show tomorrow. And
it's our last day tomorrow.
Yeah, our last day tomorrow, and then we're off and back to work. And
we're flying out Wednesday. And okay, so for me, just as a quick update, we've done all kinds of touristy things, seeing things like the Tower of London, Tower Bridge. Tomorrow we're going to see the Globe Theatre, all that kind of stuff. And we saw a show, a very British comedy show called Only Fools and Horses that our friend Fiona let us know about. But generally, it's been amazing because we're so comfortable on the subway and the trains and all that stuff. And we've got some good access for touring stuff. It's just been a wonderful trip.
I know. I feel like I kind of live here now because we're in an Airbnb. We have a kitchen and doing our laundry. And it's been nice.
So, London was always a city I always wanted to go to. And now we can check that off our list.
Done.
That is it for today's show. Please try and make wellness a priority.
You deserve it.
If you feel the need to talk to someone or ask for help, please do that.
Accept yourself for the person you are.
So long.
Adieu.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye.